All-electric cars have struggled in the marketplace because the batteries that power them are costly, and the batteries have to be recharged about every 300 miles. But in early 2013, Tesla Motors announced higher than expected sales of its all-electric cars. Tesla sells all of its cars online and relies on company-owned service centers to provide maintenance. Tesla's managers also face a number of decisions. For example, each month they must decide on the quantity of Model S sedans and Model X SUVs to manufacture. Producing more units of one model means producing fewer units of the other. We will explore this challenge in the context of decision-making tools we can use to make economically efficient decisions. Scarcity is a regular situation in which unlimited wants exceed the limited resources available to fulfill those wants. The economic systems scattered around the world cover the spectrum from centrally planned to mixed and free enterprise economies, each approaching the solution in different ways. These all share the challenge to decide what to produce, how to produce it, and for whom production is generated for. A production possibilities frontier is a simple model that economists can use to analyze trade-offs, such as the trade-off Tesla faces when deciding how many of each type of automobile it should produce at its plant in Fremont, California, given its limited resources. A production possibilities frontier, or PPF, is a curve showing the maximum attainable combinations of two products that may be produced with available resources and current technology. We will discover in this video how these concepts are united into powerful economic analysis tools. In economics, we often consider information based on criteria of it being positive or normative. The production possibilities frontier is only useful when the data are constructed from positive data. Normative data are often asserted as a value judgment, asserting desirable or undesirable, good or bad. You might hear these opinions stated as we should do this or that. They are the basis of value statements. Positive statements are fundamentally based on facts and reasonably expected outcomes. These statements are supported by verifiable information and not weighted down by opinions. In economics, positive statements are the gold standard of information we strive to use and to create. A production possibilities frontier, the PPF, is a curve, or in this case a straight line, making the exchange constant to show the maximum attainable combinations of two products that may be produced with available resources and current technology. All combinations of products on the frontier are efficient because all available resources are being used. Combinations inside the frontier are inefficient because maximum output is not being obtained from available resources. Points outside the frontier are unattainable given the firm's current resources. Opportunity cost is the highest valued alternative that must be given up to engage in an activity. We use the opportunity cost to describe many events in economics and in life, to explain what must be given up to get something else. On this graph, we see how Tesla gives up production of 20 sedans for the production of 20 SUVs. In your personal life, you might give up attendance to a ball game in exchange for writing a term paper for your economics class. The opportunity cost of writing your term paper was attendance at the game. A production possibilities frontier that is bowed outward illustrates increasing marginal opportunity costs, which occur because some workers, machines, and other resources are better suited to one use than to another. Increasing marginal opportunity costs illustrates an important concept. The more resources already devoted to any activity, the smaller the payoff to devoting additional resources to that activity. In this case, we see that movement from B to C leads to a decrease in the production of 150 tanks to the benefit of an additional 200 automobiles. Therefore, the opportunity cost of 200 additional automobiles is the forfeiture of 150 tanks. In like manner, we can see the opportunity cost of producing 50 additional tanks from 350 to 400 carries an opportunity cost of 200 automobiles. The payoff from the additional resources contributed to tanks reached a level of diminishing returns. Economic growth is the activity of the economy to increase the production of goods and services. Economic growth can occur if more resources become available or if a technological advance makes resources more productive. Growth may lead to greater increases in production for one good than another. This outward shift of the PPF creates new production possibilities for the business, the sector, and the country. Often, technological growth is not constant between sectors. This is seen when, for instance, technologies in tank production are not increased as they are in automobile production, and the production possibilities frontier shifts outward for automobiles only, creating new attainable production possibilities. These ideas eclipse business operations to include study for your college classes. Sometimes the trade-offs are constant exchanges, like the Tesla example, and sometimes they are bowed outward, like the tanks automobile example. Between studying for your economics or accounting class exams, the PPF curve will be bowed outward, because the value of additional hours studying for either exam will be less valuable than the time spent studying for the first hour of either exam. Trade is the act of buying and selling. Trade makes it possible for people to become better off by increasing both their production and their consumption. We look at this example of neighbors picking apples and cherries. You can pick 20 pounds of either apples or cherries a day. Your neighbor, though, picks 30 pounds of apples but can pick 60 pounds of cherries a day. PPFs show the combination of two goods that can be produced if no trade occurs. We can also use PPFs to show how someone can benefit from trade even if he or she is better than someone else at producing both goods. This simple example shows us an important feature of trade between people, regions, and countries. It shows us how both parties can benefit from trade, even if one party is less productive than the other. That is to say, by specializing in what each is relatively good at. Looking at the constant costs PPF for each person, we see where you might select to produce on the PPF line, not above it and not below it. You may pick 8 pounds of apples and 12 pounds of cherries for yourself, while your neighbor may pick 9 pounds of apples and 42 pounds of cherries for her uses. Specialization means your neighbor will pick the cherries because she is comparatively better at picking them than you are, while you pick apples. Even though you are not as good an apple picker as your neighbor, you picking apples allows her to concentrate on what she is better at, picking cherries, while you pick apples. You pick 20 pounds of apples, she picks 60 pounds of cherries, and you trade products. Your consumption moves to 10 pounds of apples and 15 pounds of cherries, while your neighbor consumes 10 pounds of apples and 45 pounds of cherries. Because of trade, you both consume more of each product than when you did not trade. This simplistic scenario is repeated on regional, national, and international trading exchanges. Each part of the economy benefits from trade. Absolute advantage is the ability of an individual, a firm, or a country to produce more of a good or service than competitors, using the same amount of resources. If the two individuals have different opportunity costs for producing two goods, each individual will have a comparative advantage in the production of one of the goods. Comparative advantage is the ability of an individual, a firm, or a country to produce a good or a service at a lower opportunity cost than competitors. Comparing the possible combinations of production and consumption before and after specialization and trade occurs proves that trade is mutually beneficial. This is where we apply opportunity cost principles to understand that your ability to pick 20 pounds of apples or cherries means that your opportunity cost of picking 1 pound of apples is 1 pound of cherries. Your neighbor's opportunity cost of picking 1 pound of apples is 2 pounds of cherries. Therefore, your neighbor has a larger opportunity cost of cherries than you do when picking apples. At the same time, you have an opportunity cost of 1 pound of apples for each pound of cherries you pick, while your neighbor carries a half-pound opportunity cost of apples for each pound of cherries she picks. This comparison is the basis for trade. Your neighbor's opportunity cost of cherry picking is to forego picking half a pound of apples. She gives up fewer pounds of apples than you give up. Therefore, she has comparative advantage for cherry picking. At the same time, she gives up 2 pounds of cherries for each pound of apples she picks, while you give up only 1. Based on opportunity costs, your highest and best use is to pick apples and trade with your neighbor for cherries. Overall, production and consumption are increased because of trade. The basis for trade is comparative advantage. Remember that. It is not absolute advantage. Individuals, firms, and countries are better off if they specialize in producing the goods and services for which they have a comparative advantage, and obtain the other goods and services they need by trading. In the United States and most other countries, trade is carried out in markets. A market is a group of buyers and sellers of a good or a service, and the institution or arrangement by which they come together to trade. A product market is a market for goods, such as computers, or services, such as medical treatments. A factor market is a market for the factors of production, such as labor, capital, natural resources, and entrepreneurial ability. Factors of production are the inputs used to make the goods and services. Each component interacts with the other component to make the system interdependent on their interactions. A circular flow diagram is a model that illustrates how participants in markets are linked. The diagram demonstrates the interaction between firms and households in both product and factor markets. People enter the factor market to supply labor that firms hire, while firms pay for their work through the factor market that people in households accept. Firms make products and provide services through the product market that households purchase. It is this circular flow diagram taken at small levels, like cities, to larger levels, like states and countries, making businesses and households mutually dependent. In this simplified model, we have not included some key players, such as governments, property rights, financial systems, or international trade. We explore those components in more detail in Chapter 19. Stay tuned. A free market is one with few government restrictions on how a good or service can be produced or sold, or on how a factor of production can be employed. Adam Smith is considered the father of modern economics. His book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, was an influential argument for the free market system. A key to understanding Adam Smith's arguments is the assumption that individuals usually act in a rational and self-interested way. This assumption underlies nearly all economic analyses. Keep this one in mind. People usually act in a rational and self-interested way. Entrepreneurs are an essential part of a market economy. An entrepreneur is someone who operates a business, bringing together the factors of production, labor, capital, and natural resources, to produce goods and services. Entrepreneurs often risk their own funds to start businesses and organize factors of production to produce those goods and services that consumers want. The absence of government intervention is not enough for a market economy to work well. Government has to provide a legal environment that allows markets to operate efficiently. Property rights are the rights individuals or firms have to the exclusive use of their property, including the right to buy or sell it. To protect intellectual property rights, the federal government grants inventors patents, exclusive rights to produce and sell a new product for 20 years from the date the patent was filed. Books, films, and software receive copyright protection. Under U.S. law, the creator of a book, film, or piece of music has the exclusive right to use the creation during the creator's lifetime. The creator's heirs retain this right for 50 years after the death of the creator. Could a production possibilities frontier be bowed inward? Think about what that would mean. A reduction in the production of tanks would always mean an increase in automobiles greater than the decrease in tanks. You would settle on one end of the spectrum and not even consider producing any of the other products. PPF is a positive economic analysis tool. Beware of normative arguments applied to PPF curves, because those two do not go well together. Comparative advantage is the mecca of determining the basis for trade. Master this concept, and you will understand how trade is enabled. Free markets are empowered by active government participation to support the rule of law, property rights, currency valuation, and national defense. Free markets do not happen by chance. They are the result of structured organization of governments, with businesses and households to support a way of life.